Welcome to the Strategic Leader podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to the Strategic Leader. Hi, Gem.
Hi there, Fi. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. May I start by asking you a slightly personal question?
Okay.
You're unconvinced of Ealing. Do you know your love language, Gem?
I think I might need a little more context before I can answer that question safely.
Safely. Well, it sounds like it's an out of context question, but this came up in a team coaching conversation I had just last week.
Huh?
And it was quite revealing, not because the conversation wasn't about love, but it was very revealing. Let me tell you, there's 5 love languages. Did you know this?
No.
They are quality time, hanging out with your partner, words of affirmation, telling each other that you love each other and complimenting, physical touch. I don't need to say more about that. Receiving gifts, presumably giving gifts too, and acts of service.
Ooh, okay.
Do you think one of those speaks to you more than the others?
I think the one that stands out for me in terms of my language to my husband would be quality time. That's something I value offering, and I also value when we get it. So quality time is probably the big one. I have to say, though, acts of service, I really don't want to put the bins out.
Well, do you speak the same love language then as your husband?
Well, yes, I think we will have differences, but there's generally not much objection to doing things like going for walks, going out for a meal, doing things that are just time together. So I think he probably does value the quality time aspect as well. And he does do more than his fair share of the laundry, which is quite nice.
Acts of
So I wonder if
service.
that's his act of service.
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh,
What about
interesting.
you?
Well, I would say I was quality time.
Mm.
That's probably my love language. I definitely think my husband is acts of service, showing love through acts of service. I guess the point we're making here is that we have a preferred style,
Mm.
we have a preferred language, but we don't mind the others. Like all the others are good. It's not like any
Mm.
of them, they're all good. It's just that we would have a preference. We might like all of them, but one of them would probably come more naturally to us. And that was the context in which we started this conversation. Someone said, "Oh, this is about love languages, isn't it?" And I was like, "Gosh, I don't claim to be an expert in love languages," but it was an interesting comparison. We were talking about personal values and whether we have different personal values and what it means when you have values that are different from somebody else's. And broadening this out to the subject of this podcast as being part of your strategic leaders toolkit and an intentional approach to how you build your leadership capability. If you remember season 1, talking very much about leading those strategic outcomes, series 2, very much leading yourself and understanding what's going on for you. And where we are now in series 3 is about focusing on how we work with other people, then understanding our own values and how they may be different to those around us is a really critical part of that leadership toolkit. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Not love languages, I'm terribly sorry, particularly, but those values that you may not be aware of that are at work within you. You might be. Some people have done some work on their values, but you may not think about them on a regular basis. And that means you may not have in your mind when you're setting off to do a piece of work with somebody else that they may have different values. They may be coming from a different place. And this idea that even though we may be quite clear on the shared job we have to do together, whether it's with a peer, whether it's with your manager or somebody that you're managing in your team, that you might be quite clear on what the task is. If you approach that task with very differing underlying values, that can create some prickly moments. It can create some disagreements. It can create some butting heads together sometimes,
Mm.
that isn't necessary if we just take a moment to think, hold on a second, maybe there are different values at work here. And maybe instead of there being differences, instead of thinking of them as differences, you can think of them as just different ingredients to add to the mix, different valuable ingredients to add to the mix.
So this picks up on what we talked about in the last episode, doesn't it? Where we were talking about steps to effectiveness, beginning with awareness. But beyond awareness, we need to understand what it is that we're aware of and accept that understanding, and then appreciate that there are differences, appreciate that we all look at things from a different perspective, and that actually can bring much more. It's more generative, it's more creative, it can bring better ideas, it can bring a better strategic outcome to a situation than if we solely kind of focus on our own perspective on things.
Absolutely. So our ability to work with others, doesn't matter who they are, we're seeking a really effective outcome, aren't we? And this is one of the
Mm,
things that we may miss. We may be looking purely from a task perspective about what needs to be done, what's our deadline, what's our project management process. We may miss, because we're not aware, to that first point of that model that we used last week, we may not be aware that differing values may be lurking and they may trip us up, or bringing different diverse values to and valuing that diversity of values may actually add something more. So
absolutely.
there's a number of different ways of looking at values. I mean, there's as many different ways of looking at them as there are different values themselves. I think we've got a couple of ideas to share with you. You may respond better to one or the other. But there's one model, let me share, because I use this one quite a lot. If I was to say to you, of which of these 5 things, Gem, do you think is more you in your approach to how you might go about do something? Just
Okay.
listen out, there's 5 of them. And is there one in there or 1 or 2 in there that don't really feel like you? So
So whilst
these
whilst you're reading this list,
Yeah,
listeners also listen to this list and think about whether any of them resonate for you too.
absolutely. So they are, number 1, and these are in no order, by the way. Do it now. Number 2, do it right. Number 3, do it together. Number 4, do it this way, which in brackets means my way. Number 5, do it in harmony.
Okay. So do it now, do it right, do it together, do it this way, or do it in harmony. I would say the ones that pop out to me in that list would be do it now and do it right.
I'd agree. Knowing what I know about working with you, I would agree. Which one of those feels like something you might be able to live without if you had to?
Between do it now and do it right, or all
Oh, no,
5?
the others. No, which of the others?
The others. I would say do it this way because I don't respond very well to other people wanting me to do it in exactly the way that they think is the right way, and there be no flexibility to that. So I think that one is the one that is the least important to me.
So if you were working with somebody for whom do it this way was quite a key approach, you might sometimes come up against that person with a few challenges occasionally. If
Yes, I
that
think so. Yes. I mean, I suppose there's exceptions to that where I haven't got a clue, so it's useful to know a step by step. But then, as I build my understanding of it, I I think I naturally tend towards creativity rather than process step following as a preference.
And I think that raises a good point, doesn't it? Because all of these things are going to be useful at different moments.
Mm,
And actually, they could all be brilliant. If we had a project or a piece of work that was delivered now correctly together,
mhm.
following somebody's process and with a sense of harmony about it, that would be the most amazing project. But then they are rarely delivered like that.
Mm.
Something will always be sacrificed. And I suppose the key thing is not to say, well, one is better than the other. Like with those love languages, one is not necessarily better than the other. And wouldn't it be fab if we had all of them? But it's around saying, where am I coming from predominantly? And am I aware of that? Am I aware of what I'm bringing into this conversation with other people?
Mm.
And what are they? And where do I need to pay attention to what they might need? And how potentially can I communicate what I might need? So, for example, I'm also do it right. As my background as a strategist, I'm a thinker. I like to think things through. I like to join the dots in my head, and I like to make sure that something really makes sense before I move on it. If I'm working with somebody who's purely a do it now, then it can feel to them like I'm putting the brakes on, and it can feel to me like they're rushing me. But if I know that that's how I operate, and I say, can you just give me 5 minutes to think this through before we press the go button? Or can you just let me mull this over for a day or so before we bring the other people in? Or can I just go and check this against our strategy document to make sure it makes sense? Something like that. If I know where I'm coming from and I feel able to ask for what I need, then A, I'm more likely to get it, and B, they're going to learn something about working with me, and of course, vice versa. So I guess the point here is not what you are. This is not some kind of diagnostic tool or exercise. It's about recognizing, oh, I probably have an approach here.
Mm.
Am I aware of what that is? And am I aware of that impact on other people when I'm working with other people? And also, can I pay attention to what their needs are? And can I value the diversity that their different values or their different needs or their different drivers may bring to this piece of work?
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose there must be shades of grey on this in terms of how extreme each version of those five are that you describe. Because I am certainly very strongly do it now. I'm very action oriented. I like to get on with things and I
Mhm.
respond very well to pace. But I do like to have that do it right aspect too. But I definitely have a enough in brackets. I'm quite tuned into what feels right enough. I'm
Mhm.
not a perfectionist. We've talked before about some of these different
Yeah.
internal blockers in series two. I wouldn't describe myself as a perfectionist, which I would associate with a very strong do it right,
Yeah.
but I do want to know enough about something before I just get on with it, which is actually my dominant driver, I would say, is the action driver of do it now.
And so if we were working with somebody in our team or perhaps somebody above you, do you know what drives them? Do you know what they are most tuned into? And therefore, do you know what they're wanting from you? So when you present a proposal or a piece of work or a one pager, whatever it might be, an idea to them, are you presenting it to them in a way that presses their buttons? So, for example, if they are a do it now, are you presenting it in a way that says, right, these are our next steps, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we're going to do, all you need
Mhm.
to do is press go? Or are you presenting it in a way that says, we're going to check with everybody, then we're going to involve everybody, then we're going to have a round table, then we're going to run a workshop, and then we're going to put some suggestions together? That isn't really going to press their buttons. That might be your approach.
Mm.
There may be a lot of value in that, but if you're trying to get somebody to say yes, or you're trying to get something moved on, is that the best way of doing it? If we don't pay attention to what presses their buttons?
Yes, and I think this has really reminded me of the tool I use an awful lot with individuals and teams, core strengths. Strengths deployment inventory it's called, or core strengths, or SDI.
Oh, I know SDR. Yes, you've done that for me.
Yes, and it looks at our core filter on the world, core filter on how we approach things through three different possible perspectives. First of all, one is people, which is coloured blue. One is performance, which is all about action, which is coloured red. And the third one is process, which is all about logic and analytical rational thinking, those sorts of things. And there are basically 7 places you can be on this particular model, and it really depends on the blend that you have of those 3. So it doesn't pigeonhole you as
Hmm.
a people or performance or process necessarily, because what it's saying is we have all 3. It's just that we have them in a slightly different mix, and that
Yes.
then determines where you sit on the model. And where I sit on the model is slap bang in the middle.
So there must be some upsides of being in the middle.
Yeah, well, you're a completely even blend of all 3, so it is easy to adjust to other people. Lots of people say to me, "Surely it's the best. The middle's called the hub." And they sort of say, "Well, surely that's the best place to be because you can adapt and work with different people in their way, meet them with their needs more easily because you're not actually so far away from that perspective yourself." And all of that is true. But what it doesn't give you is that essence of predictability, which is quite useful when you work with other people, isn't it? You said earlier to focus on what the other person might want to hear. If they are a do it now kind of person, they want to hear the action points. They don't necessarily want to hear about the people in that example that you gave. Now, when you're in the hub, when you have this even blend of all 3 perspectives, there's very little predictability to the other person about what you might need or want to hear. So we can get a little bit confused. We can get a bit lost in that lack of predictability. And it's reminding me of this model because I recently worked with a team using this core strengths tool. And the idea was to help them to identify some of the differences in each other's approach that they had and that they wanted to understand better. And as part of this exercise, I asked them a question, which was, what do you need from a meeting? What do you need to achieve? What do you need the meeting to feel like? How do you need the meeting to be run? Come at that question from your perspective of wherever you sit on this profiling tool. They'd all completed the profile before. And we had lots of different answers in the room. The answers varied quite massively, actually. Everybody said they needed an agenda. Great. That's a given, I suppose. But some people felt a little bit restricted by too much of an agenda. They wanted to ensure that the discussion had a bit of space to evolve and didn't want to feel too confined to some preconceived agenda points. Some people wanted others to have a bit of a pre-read beforehand so that they could be a bit more focused on the detail and the process. Some people needed the meeting to really encourage inclusivity, to encourage participation. And you can imagine how the discussion unfolded. But what this exercise was doing was it was unwrapping some of that mystery, if you like, helping to surface that awareness that we've talked about of each other's needs, what it is that we particularly want to achieve or get from our interaction with others.
Yeah, what's critical about that meeting is the fact that that's what the conversation was about, which is what do we all need from this? What is important to all of us
Mm.
here? And a recognition that, many of the different points, whether you use that SDI model or whether you use that do it now, do it right kind of model, whichever model or approach you use, just an acknowledgement that we're often going to be coming from very different places. And that's fine. Because if you had a meeting that did have pre-reads and did have an agenda and did have space for people to freestyle and did have an opportunity for people to connect with their teammates and was really productive and efficient, if you had a meeting that was all of those things, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? So all of those different approaches build on each other. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The critical part is to be aware that those differing values, differing forces, different drivers are present, and you kind of ignore them at your peril. You kind of think, well, that's not the work we're here to do, but it will either enable the work that you're doing or it'll get in the way of the work that you're doing if you don't pay attention to it. So it's kind of up to you. It's about being aware of it, understanding it, and valuing that difference, making space for that difference and valuing that difference in the pursuit of coming up with a better outcome, ultimately being more effective.
So when you're working with teams, 'cause I know you do a lot of this type of work, Fee, and so the raising awareness of it, I can hear very clearly, and that's a super valuable part of this. How do you then help them to put that into practice? What tips do you give the teams to actually enable that to be of value in on a day-to-day basis?
Well, one very simple tool that you can adapt in all kinds of different ways is helpful and hindering behaviors. So simply if you are having that conversation as a group, it's to take each person at a time and say what are the behaviors that they exhibit that are helpful to the team and what are the behaviors they exhibit that are hindering. Everybody will have things that they appreciate. So I'm not really a do it now person particularly. It's not sort of at the top of my list. I do value getting stuff done, obviously, but I love working with a do it now person because they bring something to the mix that I need. I need a bit of that. So I love working with someone else. It can make me feel a bit uncomfortable at times, but I do value what they bring. So if I was to say, if I'm describing you, I would say what I really value about you is that do have a bias for action. So you're going to go, so what does that mean we do next, Fee? All the time. And that helps me. The hindering behavior may be if you go ahead and act without giving me a chance to think about it. I would find that hindering. So surfacing those helpful and hindering behaviors as a team, as a group, or as a pair, if it's somebody in your team or you and your manager, can be massively helpful. That would be tip one. Tip two, maybe even comes earlier, is just to kind of look at some of these different values models. So, have a look at the love language as a place to start, because there's loads on that. And you certainly don't have to read very deeply to figure out how that one works. But, have a look at various different models and think, okay, just to sort of be aware of the different things that could be going on in the room, understand where you are, and also understand that that's not right or wrong, that's just you, and other people may be different. And I guess another thing which is possibly super simple is that the minute you step into a call, a meeting, some sort of conversation with one person or any other people is ask what does good look like? What would good look like at the end of this hour? Some person is going to say, we have the right answer. Some person is going to say, we've all worked really well together. Some person is going to say, good looks like the fact that we can fully justify our answers to leadership. People are going to come out with different answers and they may all be instructive and valuable to you. So that would be a third tip that I would have. Simply ask, for our time together today, what does good look like?
Oh, I love that because it's so tempting, isn't it, to feel like you know what good looks like.
Yeah,
Especially if you are the leader of that
we make
particular
assumptions, don't we? Yeah.
meeting. Yes, we make assumptions. We believe that a good outcome for this meeting is whatever it is, any of those that you've listed, but they are based on our own
Yes.
needs. And if we extend that out to the group to also offer what else would be good for them, what would a good outcome look like for them, we are more likely, aren't we, to get that range of perspectives that then enables us to have a little bit of a checklist that we've achieved all of those, not just the thing that was the first thing on our list. And if we'd
Yeah.
spent a moment longer, we'd have something slightly different. We'd have a longer, a fuller list of what good outcomes there might be. You mentioned looking at some other models because one came to mind that I just want to make as a suggestion for listeners as well is the drivers. It's Kahler. I'll put the reference in the show notes. But the Kahler drivers I use very much on a personal coaching perspective. This idea that we have the motivations that sit behind our most used behaviors, and they're quite similar in some ways to the do it now, do it right, etc. But there are one or two differences. So you might like these as well as or instead of. So the drivers are please others, that people pleaser driver.
Mhm.
Try hard, so it's related to putting lots of effort in, working very hard, and that's really important to you. Hurry up, very connected
Mhm.
to the action.
Yeah.
One, do it now. Be strong. which is quite an interesting one,
Mm.
probably a topic for another conversation,
Uh-huh.
and be perfect. So do it
Ooh.
right, but in that extreme version. So those are the Kahler drivers, and they may also be something to explore in yourself or in others. Which of those might resonate for you? So please others, try hard, hurry up, be strong, and be perfect. So one or two
And
of
you
those might stand out.
Yeah. And you can see that each of those is gonna have upsides, and
Mm,
each of those is also gonna have downsides. So,
definitely.
we'd want a blend, wouldn't we? So, I guess the key point from today when we're talking about working with others is just recognizing that we see the world through our own individual lens, and that lens is colored by our deeply held beliefs and our values and our needs and our drivers, whatever language you choose to attach to it. They won't be the same as everyone else's. Nobody's right or wrong. And being aware of these and being aware that other people that we're dealing with are likely to be different, but also likely to be of value to us, is such a helpful place for being more effective, getting stuff done, smoothing out the butting heads moments or the slightly prickly, antsy moments that, we all have those when we're working with other people. And it also means that you can apply this thinking and this learning to disputes you may come across with members of your team, for example, or between other people. You can point out or you can notice what might be going on in others and in other relationships around you, as well as the ones that you're in. So that's today's thinking, is around understanding different values that might be conflicting and how to stay aware of them and how to use that awareness to achieve a better outcome.
Great stuff. Well, I'm going to reflect on the love language. Might have a chat with hubby later. Until next time, Fee, as ever, it's been great.
Thanks so much, Jem. Thank you to everybody for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.